And as promised, we're back with the third part of our archetype lecture. We're going to start with setting archetypes and what kinds of commonplaces and settings and environments we can use and relate to on an archetypal or primordial, if you will, level. Let's start with one of the original Judeo-Christian archetypes, and that is the Garden of Eden, that perfectly planned, beautiful, utopian, orderly civilization. Definitely the Garden of Eden represents or is a source archetype for hope and new birth, because the first man and the first woman were created there. Also a representation of paradise. You can relate to the garden archetype when you look at the grapes of wrath, and the family really believed, and Steinbeck wrote in the novel, that they were going to their new Eden. Steinbeck wrote another novel called East of Eden, and definitely there was a connection there to the Garden of Eden. That is exactly what he meant. And so whenever we see gardens in literature, we need to stop and think, okay, well, what might this garden represent? I mean, we just finished at Hudson High School a whole play called The Secret Garden. And what did that turn out to be? It turned out to be a life-giving place of hope and rejuvenation and birth, and clearly that occurs in that play. It occurs all across literature. So whenever you see a garden, maybe that's untended or dead, that can have the opposite meaning of hope and new birth, and you'll find that more as you go along. Another setting archetype that is maybe a little bit more shady, if you will, sorry for that, is the forest. It falls under the shadow archetype many times, and it can represent evil, darkness. We think back to the Crucible, and the Puritans definitely thought of physically of the forest and the woods as an evil place where the spirits partied down at nighttime. The forest is also, if you ever read the Scarlet Letter, or if you know anything about it, Hester Prynne, who has committed the crime of adultery in a Puritan society, which could be punishable by death. They decided not to kill her, but instead they sent her out to a little hut on the edge of the forest, so in a very antisocial place outside of society. The forest can also represent that wild, untamed place. It can represent the unpredictable, the unknown, and often for the Puritans, so certainly the power of nature and what could go wrong. I mean, the Native Americans lived in the woods, so that was a scary place for them. But we can think of the Robin Hood legend, the legend of Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest and what goes on in there. They were wild and untamed and antisocial. Think of Peter Pan in the forest there. Can represent the unknown. It doesn't always have to be evil, but when you see a forest, you need to take note and try to figure out, well, what's going on there, and why and how is that significant to the story. Another very important setting element or archetype would be a cave or a tunnel. And quite simply, it could represent thought and introspection and the need to remove oneself from society and just maybe reflect on life experiences thus far, or life experiences that are perhaps to come. It can signify inactivity. We think of bears going into the caves to hibernate. So it could be an opportunity for a character to reflect or to remain inactive. Think of Invisible Man, and he referred to his warm hole or his cave. That's exactly what that archetype is. Ralph Ellison was referring to the archetype of the cave, where in his story, the character, the Invisible Man, was basically inactive. He was waiting for something. He was hibernating, and he even referred to himself as a hibernating bear. Caves and tunnels could also represent death. And so sometimes when a character goes into a cave or a tunnel, there's the thought of death in the air as well, or could be, not always. This is one that I hope you're starting to see how incredibly obvious and oftentimes clear these archetypes can be. What happens? What are the qualities of a mountain or a peak? Well, when you climb to the top of a mountain, you can see really far. From your vantage point, you can see far and wide and deep. And so the depths of your understanding, your metaphorical understanding, the ability to gain great insight. That's why the guru, the archetypal guru, is always at the top of a mountain, and characters have to go on a quest to climb to the top of the mountain to find wisdom and truth. And that is a archetype as old as time, probably, and it's, again, not rocket science. It sort of makes sense. There's the archetype of the island and the standalone place. And islands can be interesting places because they can really represent a microcosm of society. If you ever read The Lord of the Flies, about the plane crash with these young British schoolboys that crashes on this island, and then they have to start again. They have to re-civilize, or well, they become very uncivilized actually, but they have to try to rebuild a community, and they're not really very successful at it. And it becomes a microcosm, or a small world that we can look at and kind of judge and assess. Islands can also represent isolation, the need to be away from the world, maybe even the need to seek out a sanctuary and a place for reflection again, or rest, somewhat similar to the cave. All right, we're going to move forward to some symbols and some motifs that are archetypal in nature. Now, I want to first start by explaining the difference between a symbol and a motif. A symbol is one thing that represents itself and something else. It's more abstract. So I'm going to use a very, very simple symbol, the dove. It's a bird, represents itself, a bird, a dove, but it also metaphorically represents peace, right? The same with, say, a red rose. It's a rose, it's a flower in and of itself, it stands alone, but it's also representative of love or beauty. Now, a motif is a symbol that an author or a storyteller repeats throughout the course of a piece of literature or a song or a poem or a movie. And oftentimes that motif will be used in different ways, slightly different ways throughout that piece. If you read Slaughterhouse-Five last year, you know what I'm talking about. If you didn't, I'll explain it to you. There is one of them, it's full of motifs, Slaughterhouse-Five is. And motifs oftentimes function to connect our story together and give it a sense of unity, and it definitely functions in that way in Slaughterhouse-Five. There is, early on, the narrator talks about being nestled like spoons, and you immediately think of how two spoons fit together in a drawer, and he refers to that when he's talking about some soldiers, some prisoners of war who are so cold that they nestle together like spoons, and that nestling like spoons represents comfort and finding some sense of peace in a very unpeaceful situation. Later on, he uses the spoon as a way to deliver this very sugary syrup to the POWs who aren't really supposed to be eating the syrup, but they are, and they're using spoons to do it. And there's that spoon motif again. Again, it represents for the POWs comfort in a place that's very uncomfortable. So it's a repeated symbol. It's used a little differently each time, but it carries with it an interesting commonality, that commonality with the instance of the spoons, of all things, of comfort. Then we have some really obvious symbols and archetypal symbols, and could be even motifs. The tree. Tree represents a life. Tree represents knowledge, and we're going to be reading a story pretty soon here after Thanksgiving, where the main character sits under a pear tree, and it has a very important significance that we'll find out at that time. We also obviously think of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, and that's that famous tree that Eve decides that she's going to eat of because God told her not to, and the serpent told her he should. He deceived her and used his evil ways to say, hey, you know, God just doesn't want you to know everything he knows, so you should go eat that tree and then you'll know everything God knows. And so Eve disobeys God, and her and Adam are kicked out of Eden. But the tree and the serpent are two very, very early and old archetypal symbols. We look at water. as a motif, sometimes as a symbol. And you certainly covered some of that when you read How to Read It Like a Professor. Generally speaking, water is a source of life. We talk about being baptized, and we can be ironically baptized or, legitimately baptized and legitimately cleansed and purified. We look at different types or bodies of water, one being the river. And the river specifically is a boundary or a border. In Huckleberry Finn, it is one of the most powerful symbols and motifs throughout the entire story because it is the vehicle that Huck uses basically throughout his journey, is that boundary. And the river for Huck represents freedom and safety. And land is where scary, bad things happen. And the river is where the freedom lies. The river can also symbolize entering some new territory. It could symbolizing a crossing over of a character, both literally or physically. It could represent the passing of time, the passing of a human life, or even part of a journey. And as they lay dying, certainly the river crossing is one of the most important pieces in that story. We also have the body of water that is the sea. And you think about Odysseus and his journey on the dangerous and chaotic sea. And if you've ever stood on the shore of the ocean or been on an ocean liner, you know there's this sense of it never ending, this sense of infinity, of eternity. And you look out and all you see is water, and there's no land in sight. And the sea can represent those elements as well. And then we have another element of water. And again, there are many more. We have the fountain. And the fountain represents, the fountain of youth or purification and rebirth, because it's water that's completely, well springing and completely rejuvenating itself as it goes along. Another couple of archetypes, which we will definitely get into in our packet more extensively, are colors. And I think one of the best examples that I can use that we can all relate to is The Great Gatsby. I mean, my goodness, F. Scott Fitzgerald just played with the color archetypes all over the place. Red was blood, anger, passion, sacrifice. You can see that. Gold represented value and wealth, and green, the fertility. It also can represent luxury. It can represent growth. What is the green light? That's hope for Gatsby. And so we could throw hope in there for green as well. Blue is a sense of holiness, a sense of peace and serenity and truth. And I see in Great Gatsby a great use of irony with the word blue, because he talks about Gatsby and his blue lawns. And certainly there was nothing holy about what was going on in Gatsby's place. There was nothing peaceful or serene or even truthful. There was a lot of deception going on. So there was a great use of irony with the color blue there. White represents innocence and purity. And remember the first time we meet Daisy and Jordan, they're wearing white, and the white curtains are billowing in the room in that wonderful opening scene. When Gatsby first meets Daisy or reunites with Daisy, what's he wearing? He's wearing gold and white and silver. Now, the gold and the silver, I mean, he might as well be wearing a suit made of money, because that's what he's trying to exude. He's trying to represent, look, I've made it. I'm worthy of you now. And the white is important and significant there too, because what he really needs from Daisy is to start over. He wants that sense of innocence and purity that they both lost. Him through the war and however he made his money, and her through marriage and having a child. And the colors are just, the story itself is just rich with the color motif and the color archetypes. And then, of course, black always gets a bad rap with mystery, perhaps shame, death, chaos, possibly as well, the darkness of the world. Numbers are also highly symbolic and highly archetypal. We definitely find a lot of numbers in the Bible, the number 3 for the Holy Trinity, the number 4 in Native American myths is very holy, because it represents not only the 4 seasons, but the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. And again, I mean, it represents all that connection to life and earth. 7 is kind of the perfect number, because it's a union of 3 and 4, the Holy Trinity and the life cycle combined, and 7 is like an amazing number. And we see 7 in a lot of fairy tales. We see 7 in the Bible, 3 in the Bible. We see 3 in fairy tales with the 3 pigs and Goldilocks and the 3 bears. I mean, I could go on and on with these. Seasons themselves are archetypal. We obviously, and most of these are pretty obvious to you. Spring is rebirth, infancy. Summer is youth and prime. Fall is middle age, and winter is maturity and death. Now, I want you to think again about The Great Gatsby. This is our time frame for The Great Gatsby. Starts out, our narrator Nick is in the prime of his youth. By the end of that summer, what happens to Nick? In the climactic scene in the hot, hot, hot hotel room, Nick turns 30. He leaves his youth and he begins to fall into that middle age category. And of course, it is the fall as the leaves are dropping into the pool when Gatsby dies. And so we see that summer represents and embodies that the youth and energy and vitality, and by middle age, things have you've either died or you've calmed down and you've come to your senses in Nick's case, who is our protagonist in that story. Shapes are also very important in archetypes. We have the triangle, the trinity, which again represents 3. We have that circle, which is unity and perfection. There are many more, and again, the numbers and the symbols and the colors and the shapes are going to be in your packet. We have some other archetypal places. Desert, we could have put that in with our setting as well, but the desert itself represents really the sense of hopelessness. We have no water, no real powerful life force in the desert. And oftentimes, we can refer to metaphorical as well as physical deserts. And anytime a story takes place in a desert or around a desert, we want to start and ask ourselves, okay, why is it happening here? Why did the author choose this setting? What's happening? We've already talked about the journey, the quest oftentimes, and you read in How to Read It Like a Professor what the quest or the journey can be. Emotional, it can be intellectual, it can be a figurative journey, it can be a mental journey, it can be a literal journey. As they lay dying, they obviously go on a journey. It's a quest. Certainly, Grapes of Wrath is a quest. In fact, here's some famous quests. We have the Sir Galahad and the Holy Grail. We have Frodo Baggins and Lord of the Rings. We have Don Quixote and his crazy, sort of ironic quest for fantastical quest, if you will. Another situational type of archetype we find is the loss of innocence. And even though the very first word up there is through sexual experience, it doesn't always have to be through sexual experience. I mean, this is an example of Hansel and Gretel going off into the woods because of their evil stepmother, and they lose their innocence through, really, in their sense, through violence, because the witch wants to put them in an oven and eat them, and they quickly lose their sense of innocence. I often also think of Scout Finch, and at what point in that story does she lose her innocence? It's certainly not sexual, but it is definitely, there's a violent element to it when she loses her innocence. Initiation can be part of the hero's journey or experience, and it often refers to that moment when a character comes into a sense of a kind of a coming of age or into a sense of maturity. And again, I can think of To Kill a Mockingbird or many other stories. Huckleberry Finn is a great example of this as well. But through this initiation, the character gains new awareness, and becomes aware basically of new circumstances and that responsibility for trying to resolve the dilemma, the conflict. And I guess simply put, it's the moment when a character is brought into another sphere of influence. Usually in literature, it's brought into adulthood. And I again think of Catcher in the Rye, and I can hear the groans. But he definitely goes through moments of initiation throughout the course of that piece as well. And he's our hero. And that is my works cited, folks. And that is the end of this PowerPoint. I hope that you took good notes, and we're going to be applying some of these archetypes in the very near future. So be looking for them. Have your eyes and your ears alert. Thanks for listening.